So first of all, good afternoon. Thank you for being here and thank you for this invitation. This will be my first presentation in English, so please bear with me if you find any misplaced word or if I stumble upon a certain idea from time to time. It's a lot difficult to express and talk about my work in a language I'm not used to. Please go ahead. So what the challenge here is going to be to talk a little bit about my experience as a PR. I work mainly in PR. I've been working in the area of culture for the last 11 years, since 2012. I started as the communication manager for CTL, that you may know, especially because of the venue, the Lisbon venue Music Box. I was there for around 4 to 5 years, and then I started working as a freelancer. And it so happened when I came out as a freelancer, and I wasn't sure if I was going to work as a press officer, but it so happened that my career and my contacts lead me there. And now I'm working at the moment with, especially with music festivals, cinema festivals, and here and there with theater, only in the Portuguese market. So this presentation will overlook a little bit what I feel has been the behavior of, not only of the market, of the media market, the media Portuguese markets, also what I see now happening with bands and the sort of strategies and what is important when you are planning a PR campaign. Please feel free to ask me questions at any point. I find it more easier if you have a doubt, interrupt me and I'll answer it. Then probably at the end we'll go through different things and it's difficult for us to come back. So as I was telling you, my presentation will overlook a little bit of what I feel it's the evolution now of the Portuguese market. What I feel, since I'm working in communication, what I see happening is that from one hand, I see a lot more of production, a lot of more bands, promoters, people working throughout the country. And since from day one, I feel that they are now very much aware and worried about doing communication and about doing PR since their first single and the first albums. What it's creating for us PRs, there aren't many of us working specifically in the area of culture in Portugal, it's becoming really challenging to find places and to find a place, especially when we are working with non-mainstream things. I don't work mainstream artists nor mainstream festivals. It's more underground movements, bands that are very emergent or that are like on a tier, on the first level, second level tier of the market. So I see that part that is developing a lot, and what I see on the other side is what I pretty much pointed out in here. Seems like a very tragical scenario, but I think it's getting to a point where we actually need to be aware of the challenges that we have when working PR in Portugal, that although we have more cultural activity, we have less space and less specialized media. So when you now, at these days, you see a lot less of specialized journalists, okay? So when you're dealing with the media, you need to be aware that not all of them can be specialized, for instance, in music or in theater or in dance or in cinema. They need to do all of this. So you need to be prepared to also introduce them to some sort of issues and to some sort of movements that they may not be aware because people have their limits, and the limitation of time, it really affects the Portuguese market. Also, that online magazines and webs in Portugal are often non-professional. Okay, so you will be dealing with a lot of voluntary work, with a lot of people that are not professional journalists, and so that they do their work as an hobby, and on time that they don't, that it's left from their main jobs. What does this mean? That it's either when you are dealing with online media, you need to have a very prepared text and PR that can be published with all the information always. And to be aware that in order for them to write a specific, an interview, to do an interview, to do a review on the album, they must be really, really, really excited with them, or, and I'll go over that in a minute, to try and create like exclusive situations so that they feel, I wouldn't say inspired, but moved to publish. Also, space for reviews, especially in the area of music, is getting smaller. Even in printed media, you have a lot less space than you used to have for basic album reviews. In the area of cinema and theater, you have more, but in music, it's kind of shifting. So they are doing more interviews and less conversation about only the music itself and the album itself as a review, okay? And it's important for you to understand that, also to know how to approach or how to think your approach to certain types of journalists. Also, newsrooms are often located in Lisbon with a small territorial dispersion. I don't know if my audience lives in AVEIRO or if he lives in Lisbon. I'm pretty sure you agree with that. I've lived also in Lisbon for a couple of years now. I live in Gaia, just outside of Porto. And I work now mainly with projects that are in Porto. It's more difficult for projects that are outside of Lisbon to grow. It's not, I say this, I'm pretty sure you'll speak here with the journalists and with other people, and they can introduce you to their own view of what's happening. But one thing, it's an interpretation I make, is that if the phenomenon is not close, physically close, it will be a lot less harder for them to understand. And so when we are working outside of Lisbon, we need to also, first of all, be aware if anybody new is starting to work on the territory, but also be aware that you may need to explain or to create stories about what's happening on your own territory to journalists, because they are not following them on a close proximity, okay? Bigger media outlets are dedicating smaller spaces to culture in general. When I'm talking about these bigger media outlets, I'm talking about especially about television in Portugal. All the cultural programs are now being broadcast late night. When I say late night, it's after midnight, so it's really late night. And the daytime ones are the mainstream. I prefer more mainstream and popular genres, and let's understand here popular music as the one that derives from traditional music, not in the sense of pop music, okay? So for smaller artists, it's really, really difficult to be able to create a strategy also to get bigger in television media. Normally what we do is that, and also because they are pretty much broadcasting all in Lisbon and Porto, is that we take the advantage of a participation in festivals in order, because they are there, to be able to overcome and to overcome this difficulty and to have space in TV and in bigger media. Another challenge, I think, that derives from our market is a small variety of specialized media in different, when I say here, also in different genres. For instance, up until a couple of months ago, Portugal had this magazine called Loud Magazine that was printed also more dedicated to heavier groups and to heavier music, and they are now out of circulation. They only have an online magazine, also because they weren't being able to find ads and things to be printed. So that all that part of the specialized media that was allowing you to communicate to specific subcultures and to specific groups is starting also to fade away. And cultural newsrooms are getting smaller by the year. So this is pretty much, it's not a very uplifting overview of the sector, but this is what we have at the moment. And I think it's People should be aware when you are working, either if you are a band or a promoter, that you are dealing with this, because it's becoming, it was always important to strategize, to plan, and to actually create timetables for you to do a PR strategy. With this situation, it's, I think, it's even, the market is asking for you that you target and create this strategy with a more precise way, because what I find it's more difficult, for instance, when I started doing PR, it was easier for us to create this with a PR campaign, to have an album launched, let's say, in a certain day, and have pretty much all the media writing about it in that day or in the next couple of days. Even with bigger bands, I find it now a lot more difficult to do that, okay? So what I need to do is start to plan ahead with more time, and to secure specific journalists with more time than what I used to do. And it's all, when I do these masterclasses, because I don't, or when I speak with people about what I do, about this work, I also mention this because, and it's happened to me a couple of times, even with festivals that were trying to do communication, that were sending PRs like 3 days prior to the launch of an album or to the launch of an event as the first communication. This is not a strategy that will grant you a media coverage. You need to start here to plan and to strategize a lot sooner. Apart from the challenges that the market kind of brings to this job, from the part of the bands, we are dealing pretty much with small budgets to create content, let's say video, social media, etc. All the content that you can create around the music launch. Promo can require travels and other expenses. As I was saying to you, because of our market being so centralized in Lisbon, and even though the pandemic here created other options, we are now getting back to the old habits where bands used to reserve a couple of days to have to go to Lisbon to do interviews and live interviews. What may be difficult if a band works from 9 to 5 on a working day, okay? And I'm still being asked, for instance, as an example, I'm going to give you later on this presentation about Glockenwise, that it's an emergent band, but it's not that small. It has been working here for quite a while now in the Portuguese market. And even for them, I receive proposals. They have a concert, let's say, on Friday night in Lisbon, and to go 2 days before to do a live on the radio. And you have to explain them this is impossible for a band in Porto that has a job, okay? So what some strategies that people are using or can use, it's either to take a couple of days of vacation to do promo in Lisbon, but you need to be aware that this is something that you need to plan, and if you're a band or if you want to do this, you need to arrange for time and money to travel to those places. And budgets for advertising with traditional media rarely exist on the Portuguese market, even though we see now a couple of artists that have the budget to do so. Normally we don't have. So like big exposure media, it's difficult to access. And like I touched this subject just now, like when space is small, diversity seems to be affected, okay? Some music genres, and for this I cannot present, I would love to have a solution for a situation like this, but sometimes even communication cannot sort a situation where the market doesn't want a thing. And PR now, and media now rarely wants music that is outside of hip-hop, of pop genres, or even more electronic genres. For instance, rock bands and heavier spectrums than rock have are very difficult to promote in traditional media, okay? What doesn't mean that other strategies cannot be created and that you cannot, that you can't do your own promo with your own means. But you need to be aware that if a couple of years ago you could still find some places to promote this, at the present moment it's very difficult. So some music genres rarely get to certain media. Also that people, I've always said this, people that worked closer to bigger markets, like in Porto and Lisbon, seem to have easier access. And a problem we have here that it's not being overcome is that regional media, because there's a lot of regional media, but it seems not to impact a younger audience or a more open-minded audience, because sometimes it's actually easy to write, for instance, to a newspaper in Aveiro or in Leiria, and they actually are interested on doing reports and speaking about with your bands, but you feel like that they do not secure the correct answer for your bands. It's always important to do promotion, but it seems to not impact a younger audience that lives in those areas. So what are the strategies, and when I'm thinking about a PR campaign, what are the strategies we kind of use to overcome these difficulties and to be able to turn results, to give results to your bands? Negotiate premieres with key media outlets and opinion makers, okay? It's very common to do this with either both singles, with the launch of a new video. You can do this also with other sort of content you may create. And it depends on what you are able to create, but or even with a specific album, you can make some audience or some media kind of stream it first than your own platforms and tools. Be sure to secure, and that I introduced a while ago, to secure key journalists to the release timing of the album, and give them premium access to the music itself and to all of the content you are creating. Okay, when you listen to an album and you understand, okay, this makes sense to this journalist in Público, this journalist in Espresso may want to be interested on listening to this, make sure that these are your first key journalists to contact, and even to negotiate if you want, for instance, a first interview or a premiere of something, just to secure that sort of space. Tell a story. Even this we can speak about not only in music but also in festivals, and I can bring you some of the experience I have with the festivals I'm working with. The Portuguese market is now saturated with a lot of festivals, from cinema to music, whatever. And sometimes, in order for you to find space for this, you need to go outside of music and select the messages that are connected to the social, ambiental, political issues, to the issues, in fact, that are moving people in newspapers and also in socially in society. I can state you an example, for instance, with India Lisboa, that is a cinema festival I worked for a couple of years. And because this is a festival that has 10 days with more than 300 films being programmed, it's very difficult for you to sustain a PR campaign that grants access, not only at the start of the event, but throughout the event, only with cultural journalists and cultural newsrooms. So we had this film called O Processo, I can't remember the name in English, that was about the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, and it was a documentary that was filmed the background of it. So what I did when I got that movie was, I'm not going to sell this to cultural journalists, I'm selling this to the political editors, because those were the ones that followed the process and would be interested in interviewing her. The same happened, for instance, with Portuguese doc. The opening, actually, to Brazilian films I'm talking about. The opening movie was about Kaiser, a footballer that actually never played football. It was like this con man that was able to build a career in football without ever playing a game. So the film itself was not very artistical. It was one of those documentaries set for Netflix, etc., very square. So I sold them also to the journalists that were working with sports, not to the ones that were working with culture, because the story was about that. But even with with a band like Sara, I work in Porto, that it's, actually I don't bring that example, that it's a very free jazz, punk, noise band with a lead singer just screaming words and ideas around a certain state of mind he has about the times we move in, social issues. When you are promoting these, of course you talk about the music, but the argumentation goes especially to what he's doing, to identify, I'm not saying he's the new Seg Afonso or whatever, but it's the new way of doing intervention music in what we are doing now, okay? And so to find that other prism and the story that will help to sell, it's becoming more and more important for, especially in the area of music, but not only in that area. And also make sure that all your materials follow the artistical lead of what they're doing. What does this mean? If for a band is very important, the lyrical part of it is very important. You should on your PR and all the things you write and all the way you communicate and sell the story to the journalists, you should make sure to focus their attention onto that, okay? And not only on the music part. Because this may be the distinctive feature of the work, okay? And then that's the second part of what I'm mentioning here. For instance, for a festival like Tremor, it's always easier to talk about events than bands, actually, as an examples, because they normally they are easier to communicate, to build a PR strategy around, with a result that is the one that you idealized. But Tremor is also a festival that we've been working not only for the music part, but if you see all the communication, the music part is just one part of it. All the connection to the territory, all the connection to the nature of Açores. It's always been very important in the way we communicate, in all the materials we are building, and even in the way that I present the artists, that I present the distinctive characteristics of the festival, in opposed to the 300 festivals we have every year in Portugal, and how you can create a special speech around it. And also make sure you involve relevant people or artists also on the PR strategy and campaigns you are building. For instance, to invite a certain artist that communicates very well with a certain audience. Oh, people are getting crazy outside, I'm not sure. To involve a certain, commit to a certain public, and also an artist or other artists that, because of the work and the path they have done, people seem to recognize a word, what they are saying. For instance, I was speaking about Sara's, the last text and promo text we had about the previous album was written by Adolfo Luxúria Canibal. That is someone that when he speaks, everybody listens. And it was very relevant to have him connected, also because he knew the band, of course, the first connection, the people need to know each other and be connected. But it may be relevant for you when you are starting, when you are developing a PR strategy from the start, to involve also other artists and other people in your work, in what you do. You see here, you see that, it's not an example I have from my own, but this last Claudia Pascoal album, she's using all of this, yeah? The album was produced by, how is it called, the one from Silence 4? I lost his name. He's working with, the production was made by David Fonseca, that it's an artist everybody knows. She has collaborations with Marantes, a popular artist from Portugal that is now doing this tour in smaller events with a certain audience that she wants to attack, more connected to independent events and to independent venues. She has also the lead singer from Cunha, that is also a person she respects a lot. So she has all these people around this last album that's creating this, of course, also because probably she likes to work with these people, but it's creating like this communication movement about what she's doing, that it's allowing her to always to grow and to be spoken about in pretty much all media in Portugal, from the popular one to the more independent one. Any questions at this point? No. When, like I was telling you about, to be concerned, because all of us, normally we work with the lack of a lot of resources. What I'm advising also people to do is to be smart when using the ones you have. If you have a documentary, for instance, don't release it yourself without exploring any other alternative path you may have. You have like festivals, in cinema festivals, the majority of them in Portugal have parts that are dedicated to music documentaries or even to music videos. Curtas Vila do Conde has a section dedicated to music videos. So explore those options to extend, maybe they're giving aos moles, I don't know. So explore those other options, not only because they will add to your communication, they communicate to a different audience, because cinema festivals have an audience of themselves, and it also increases, before it adds a new moment to your communication strategy, and so it increases the time you will have to communicate about an album and about or about a specific thing that you have documented. If you have music videos, do think about the moments you are going to use them, when you are going to use them. Normally now when I'm working with an album, because we create a plan that normally integrates the launch of the singles, the album, and the first release concerts. We are spreading the distribution when we have more than one to before, and to have a couple of them, an option also for the after of the release of the album, because when we were feeling that when you release an album, then suddenly after that you have no new material. We don't have a lot of new material to release, so it's nice if you can actually plan it to have them also before, after, and to create this connection also with the concerts. Please do not release music videos that have investment when you release an album. This is only my opinion, of course. Maybe other people have different opinions. But if you are doing a communication on a specific date with the release of an album, please don't. The music video is a different moment of communication. So instead of putting everything together and mixing everything up, plan and spread, because I think it creates confusion, and it's prejudicial to the music video. Go to the streets if you have the money and the ideas. A couple of days ago, randomly, I was getting out of the subway station in Trindade, in the center of Porto. The Trindade is like a very central subway station, because it connects all the lines of the subway stations in Porto. And just outside, I saw this like transparent box with 3 people inside and the QR codes around them. When I was looking at that, I didn't recognize the person straight ahead. I came to realize it was Chico da Tina. I don't know if you know Chico da Tina. It's a trap artist that is now growing a lot, specifically on a younger generation. And this was an action he was doing to release his album, to release a video, a new video and a new single. So the QR codes would lead directly to the YouTube channel with the video, where it's a very clever idea, because people were reacting immediately to that. And we're seeing and increasing the views. And it creates this sort of things that people talk about around it. So if you have the money or the ideas, go for it. And when producing content, do think green. Of course, think green also for ambiental reasons. That's not the point of me putting this here. Is that when producing content, think if you're investing on something, think about how many things you can create out of that, okay? If you're doing a music video, if you're recording that, think if it's relevant for you to have behind the scenes photos, if it's relevant for you to create like this snippet videos that you can use to activate social media or to use further on with other content. Create different types of photos so that throughout the planification of the communication of an album, you can always be reutilizing without having to invest more. You can always go back and recycle the content. Or reuse it, like for instance with covers, when do animations with covers, do think about reutilizing your resources. Do think also, because of the storytelling we have been talking about, do think about what you're doing as your material to communicate, also as a vehicle to communicate what I previously talked about. If you have a distinctive character, if you're very interested in certain political or ambiental issues, do use also these resources you are using to communicate music as a way to, in parallel, communicate those distinctive ideas or characteristics of your work. Be present, think about one-to-one promo moments, not only for journalists, but also for your peers and for your local community. We are not using all of them all the time, but from time to time is relevant for you to create moments where people can interact directly with the journalists, or for instance, if you want to do something exclusive, to have listening parties or listening sessions prior to the release of the album, you can always negotiate that. I've done that with artists that weren't very big. They were finishing the recording and the mastering of the album, and I asked, in that case it was Observador, as I remember, if he wanted to follow the last days, and he would have a completely different approach to that album than another media. I did the same with this album from Black Bombay, an album that Black Bombay did and produced with 3 local producers of Porto, Jonathan, Cunha, and I will forget the third because I'm awful, but I will remember in a short while. They were doing this project throughout 6 months where they were, their music was being reinterpreted from this producer. They were doing like small presentations for a very small audience, and I negotiated with Sábado for them to follow all the production of the album prior to the launch, so that this would come out more as a report than as a review of the album. And so creating these moments or closed door situations where you can, from time to time, create this special, also to create not only with specific bands, but also because I work with labels and I work with this as a freelancer. So when I do this, I also invest on the relationships we have with the journalists, okay? To give them access from time to time to a, let's call it a candy. It allows you to create a closer connection to the journalists, because let's face it, the majority of the work a PR does, it has to do with the management of a certain chain of people and contacts that she or he has, that are of journalists, of editors, of people who kind of run the other side and that run media. So it's very important also for you not to create these situations so that not everything is digital and not everything is done through a computer or through an email address. This personal contact is also very important. be consistent over time. This meaning that when you launch, normally when you do a campaign or when you launch an album, you are very focused on the date of the launch, and then sometimes you lose energy after the album is put out. So what I advise, even when we are working and when you are facing frustration, like I did, sometimes you are with a couple of albums, the release date comes, and only small things happen in media. And when you are facing like this frustration that the strategy is not working, go for concerts, go for festivals. You can always use them as a tool to escalate or to make your promotion grow. I've done that, for instance, with Bugarins. I was promoting, I think it was their last album in Portugal, only doing the PR in Portugal, and they had this concert in Presskit, and it was very frustrating, and it still is, for us to be able to close a report for TV, so I took advantage of that, and I called the PR of the festival saying, I have these very cool bands, if you listen to them, you'll enjoy it, and they have these, they're very easy for Portuguese media to go and interview because they speak Portuguese. Because I know for a journalist that it's not specialized in culture from TV, etc., because they rarely have one that is. This could be something that they could use to have an artist that they don't have to translate. And it worked. I don't know if it was just for the fact that I reminded her that she had that band, or it was in fact due to the fact that they spoke Portuguese, but we closed a couple of interviews there in Presskit. We can also use the teams of in-house teams to promote, teams from Generation, from Teatro Circo, from a venue like Music Box that have also their own relationship with journalists and with media, can and should be used if you are facing some trouble of reaching a specific means of communication, a specific newspaper. It's very normal for me to have, when I'm outside, when I'm working with them, to have a conversation with them saying, okay, I'm promoting this, it's in both of interests to have a sold-out show, so can you help them with this, this and this, this newspaper where I'm facing some trouble? I'll take care of this, this and that communication platform because it works better for me. And so keep reminding you that you can always go back to the album and escalate it. Now I'm remembering another example from Memória do País last album, that we were being unable to get this album in Público and in Ypsilon, that it's a very relevant place to have an album featured in the Portuguese markets, not only because it impacts a lot of audiences, but also because it impacts a lot of concert promoters and programmers. And we were unable to do that while they were in here. So they were fortunately actually selected for Eurosonic that year, to go to Eurosonic. So I came back to Público with the album saying they are going to Eurosonic. Wouldn't this be a good idea to have a feature on them, as they are representing Portugal and being one of the Portuguese bands in Eurosonic? And we managed to close the deal at that point, to have the album featured in Público. And also, and now since I've moved to Porto and I started working with bands from Porto and from Guimarães and from those areas, and also Leiria, I feel that it's even more important, even for you as a communicator, to work as a network. This meaning to create your own scenes within your cities and to sell stories as a scene. We saw this happening not long ago, for those who know the Portuguese market, with Barcelos and Lovers and Lollipops and a festival called Milhões de Festa, that at some point this story was told that Barcelos was the Portuguese Seattle because of the music scene that was coming out of that. We see now a certain type of story coming out from artists that are in Porto, collaborating a lot with each other, like Jonathan, Angélica, Etche, João Paes Filipe, that have worked a lot and that kind of live in the same neighborhoods and have the same backgrounds when it comes to communication. You see a lot of the articles about one of them mentions always the others. So a lot of this story is also being told. The same was happening with Coletivo Farra, that connects bands like Conferência Inferno, who are now Lovers and Lollipops. They still belong to Coletivo Farra. Lovers and Lollipops, O Manipulador, other bands that were working as a network. And now you have others that come from Guimarães, like Unsafe Space Garden, Dada Gardec, even the ones from Rebol that was editing in there. And of course, the lady example of Omnicord and the scene that was creating about a certain cultural movement that you have there. It's always easier. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have only to do with the fact that it's easier. It has to do with when you're dealing with a situation where you need to go in Lisbon. Please look at this band in Leiria. It's easier if you show that there's a certain movement that it's coming out of there and that is producing this festival and this event and this regular cultural creation for you to be able to be featured. And also you have other examples, even in the area of Lisbon, like Príncipe Discos, also sold the story of a music genre that was being created in a specific area outside of Lisbon that came out of the history, the shared history of the people that were integrating them. And also to use identifying your peers. That means if you identify your peers, you can also create things that you could use to communicate, and that can be sold also as a PR statement, like for instance Cafetra and Maternidade used to do. They did a lot of parties with their own bands, so they were actually organizing a lot of the concerts on the first years they were doing in Lisbon were organized by themselves. So they would all be playing in them, and they were creating this audience that was getting used to seeing them all. So whenever one was editing an album for itself, they were sharing an audience that kind of grew outside of that. Working as a network, it's very important, I think, in smaller markets like the Portuguese markets. And now I open this to the question regarding this, so I can have a glass of water. No one has a question.
I have some interest. I'm interested in the listening parties and listening sessions. Especially, I have three questions around them, which are: how do you select the people that attend? Mm-hmm. What are the expectations and the outcomes, and how do you measure success?
Okay. First of all, the things you need to listen for all of them, and I'm including also the closed concerts that sometimes people do before a certain album is released. Okay, normally what you do is the same strategy I do when I listen to an album. I identify certain people in the media that I think would like those albums. Okay, that's the first thing I do. And how do I do that selection? First of all, you need to investigate and be aware of what's happening in the media. And you need to follow and investigate what sort of bands certain people are writing about. And even for yourself, when you listen to an album, you say, this looks like an album from that band. Let me do a check who wrote about it. So that would be the first step around it, okay? Then to ask those certain people that I think will like the album. Then there are certain people you cannot overcome, like certain editors, because they are the only ones working in certain media. You need to ask them. What do you need to be aware? That you would rarely invite, if you are organizing one in Porto, to invite someone to come from Lisbon to listen to that, it's very difficult. So if you are organizing an event, you will also need to invite people that would live in a short, where they don't have to go for a lot of effort to go to that, okay? So it has to do with that.
But isn't that a bit biased because you're only taking opinions from people from around the place you are?
It's all PR. It's always biased.
Sure,
okay?
for sure.
But for those listening parties, you can also invite other bands. I actually advise you for all of them to invite your peers, other bands, for them to listen and to be aware what's happening. Programmers you may know, or that you have a relationship with, and create this pre-launch of the album. So you are at this point creating a buzz around it. Okay, you are hoping that the buzz will be positive. It may not be. But when you're doing a PR campaign, you're always trying to be biased. You always want a positive review, and also negative reviews by these days are very difficult to happen. Also because let's put ourselves in the space of a journalist. If you don't have a lot of space to write, do you prefer to write about the ones you like or about the ones you don't like? So normally,
depends if you want to be polemic, because sometimes it sells. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Sometimes you when you see a review from a specific journalist and he says that something is bad, you can actually think that, oh, it will be really good, because usually I don't agree with his opinion. It happens a lot with movies and all that stuff. So.
Yeah, it's true. It can be. I don't think that the majority, the ones I work with, want to be polemic.
Sure.
Sometimes they are asked to. And every day more and more to create titles that are clickbaits, okay? And so they are also, because you can ask, maybe it's better for them to be, because I'm being broadcast, I'm a little bit worried about what I'm going to say.
No names.
Because you know that some means even the payment they are giving to the journalist depends on that. Sure. So they are kind of forced to do that. But normally what you may see happening is that after a certain point, certain artists, people need to write about it. It's impossible that Rui Reininho releases an album and everybody needs to speak about the latest album of Rui Reininho, yeah? But people may not like it, and sometimes what happens is that in music. But in cinema, no. In cinema, you still have a lot of critics. I think, I don't know if they are more free. You actually need to, maybe you can ask Mario. I don't know if he has already did his masterclass here. I think they're free, but with cinema, you see a lot of more negative criticism, even with festivals. I remember even when I was working with India Lisboa, one year, Público hated the selection. It was a nightmare until the end of the festival, because everything was like hitting us with a stick. This is not okay, this is not okay. It can happen. With music, you see a lot less of that. At least with music, you can see with production. But from time to time, you can see with production situations. But getting back to your question, because I kind of here got lost. So, territory, the ones you think that want to when you are thinking about people writing about it, okay? When you are thinking about people giving you an opinion, you can invite pretty much everybody you want. But when you are thinking about, I want them to have a positive impact, that's it. How do you measure the results? When I do, for some of those examples, the ones that are listening sessions and concerts, if they are an event with a lot of people, you're not expecting people to actually write about it, okay, afterwards, okay, unless it's kind of a plus to the fact of people have already listened to the album and want to have that part also on a band. For some cases, it would be the ideal situation. For instance, with Unsafe Space Garden, a band I was telling you about, their music that is very theatrical. It's very different when you see them live. And it was actually Mario Lopes that is writing about them. He felt the need to see the bands live. Of course, for us, a slow budget, and for them, a slow budget band that are from Guimarães in the north of Portugal, to pick up in a 7-piece band and take them to Lisbon to organize a concert, it's not possible. So what happened is that the feature was delayed for after the Lisbon show, okay? So we used the concerts to be able to complement. So that sort of strategy of organizing concerts or closed concerts for certain journalists can be used if you have the money, of course, but to have that extra to an album, okay? If you feel like a band is very strong live, you should do that. I know that Hugo from Omnicord, I didn't work on that album, but he did that when he was launching Surma. And he organized like a concert so that people would listen prior to the release. They, of course, had already listened to the album that was on record, but it felt also it was important for them to see that. And so, what is the result you see from that? Surma is everywhere, okay? So it's that how you kind of measure the impacts of that.
Thank you.
Welcome. More questions about it?
That was an awesome question, by the way. It's really cool. We need to use the mic. Yes. Okay, thank you. So, first of all, thank you very much for the valuable information you're giving out. As a small label in outside Lisboa, I was thinking about what you mentioned with close proximity networking and journalists and how it only affects the regional. How can you how can you overcome the close proximity people that you know so that you can bring more relevance to more impact to what you're actually doing? We had a problem similar to this with the festival we organized for the label. We just wanted to do a showcase for the label's work, and we got funding, but our media strategy was just a total wreck. It was a disaster. We didn't have a means to pay for like you said, like you mentioned, there's a very little means to pay for a PR team. So we were doing it all by ourselves. Of course, needless to say, that was, a disaster. But we learn from mistakes, but there's this certain amount of things that we can't do. We did invite journalists to come over, journalists that we did know, but they were in Lisbon, so they didn't travel. So I was thinking, of course, why would you travel to Coimbra, take your time if the only thing we're offering is a showcase to, so what else could we do to attract those people and to...
Practical results, pay for the accommodation and the travel. Yeah. That would be the thing I would advise you to do straight ahead. Mm-hmm. Unless you have like a very when we are launching something, the story is still building itself. Okay, so it's very difficult when we are at the first years of an event to say and to be very attractive to people and to have that storytelling so perfectly tuned that they kind of grasp it immediately. So invite strategic journalists to come, paying them. Of course, only that we don't pay them to write. This is completely forbidden. I'm not telling you that. Yeah. You pay them. No, it's not, and they wouldn't accept. What we do is we cover for accommodation and travel.
Okay.
Sometimes, if you have the funds, if you want to do that, pay for certain meals. I've been using this.
That's it.
Tremor uses that
strategy. You can't pay them a fee because that's kind of a...
That's completely
off limits.
Off limits, yes. That's completely off limits. At least for I don't know the name in English, but the Código Deontológico, what the rules, the legal rules for their, it's not, no. Oh. But normally if you invite them, they come. I use that with a lot of small festivals. For instance, for Tremor, I'm not lying. We have a lot of coverage from media outside of the Açores, but we fly them all. But at the beginning, at the beginning of the event, what we did is that we created a partnership with the local tourism association in order for them to cover part of the travels, because it was in Azores. They are very open to it. But even in Lisbon, I saw Lindy Lisboa having kind of a fee from the Turismo de Lisboa to do that. So in here it can also be an option, because normally when journalists come to here, and was happening a lot with the Azores, they were writing about the event, but they also ended up promoting something about the town, and it creates and enlarges the audience. But I use that in Guimarães with smaller events, even in Leiria. At this point, we are using that sort of strategy, also until we create a connection of close proximity, okay? After that, maybe it can happen. For instance, in the first year when Tremor lost the support, we are now paying from the budget of the event. I called the journalists and I was telling them, I'm sorry, I don't have enough money to bring all the journalists I wanted. We need to cut the list for this year's event. We are only bringing this, and some of them travel by themselves.
Great.
So if you create that sort of connection with them, it may happen, but that would be the first strategy I would advise you to follow. Is it time for a cigarette break before I go to the second part? Because I lost, yeah? So moving to the second part of the presentation, where I speak about a little bit of what are PR's do's and don'ts when you're planning a strategy. Okay, so the thing when I built this only for an album, but if you have questions regarding events, etc., do please ask, and we'll go over because it's a different strategy for a festival and for other types of contents. But the first thing we do is to think about what will be our key communication dates. That basically would be this, it can be 4, or if you have more singles, it can be more than 1 single, okay? So we start always from the release date. You know that it's the day when the album is released, and then we plan before and after, because it should cover at least the first concerts you have regarding that launch of that album, that release of that album. How do you normally would plan in terms of timing this? Also, first of all, you need to think about the production timings for this all, okay? But imagining that you have that controlled, we should be talking about, depending on how many singles, the last one would be released 1 month, 2 months before the album, okay? But you can start, for instance, 4, 6 months before the release of the album. I've seen other strategies. I never worked in an album where people have been releasing single by single, okay? It depends. It could make sense if you have a strong base of fans, or if the music is reacting very well on the internet, on your own platforms. For media to do the communication with so many singles, it can become a little bit boring. So normally what we do is that we plan for 2 singles normally with at least one with a video if you have, or with a visualizer, that it's also something that you would find. And you need to also think in between those dates. You need to give time to the single to grow, okay? When we're talking about, you shouldn't release a single and then 2 weeks after release another single. Things need to grow. They need to grow. You have to have time to connect to playlists whenever you want to release a single and have it playlisted. You need, if it goes to the playlist, it should have enough time to have rotation. I use the expressive respiration. It makes sense in Portuguese. Not sure if it makes in English. But the communication needs to breathe. You need to give time also to the music to collect fans and to be played. Of course, when we are speaking about the Portuguese market, not every singles are playlistable and reach the radios. This is another thing that it's difficult to work with in Portugal, because singles, not only the majority of the bands, there are a couple of radios that pretty much ignore that there's what we call independent music in Portugal. They ignore that market. It's true. It's true. RFM ignores that they exist. Comercial ignores that they exist. And I actually have the contact for the playlist of Comercial, and I have this joke. I tell people when I have the answer, I think it's a bot, because the answer is always the same. But that part, it's very difficult because they are only programming mainstream. I'm not advising you to not try to reach them. I'm saying that it's very difficult, and at a certain point, I was just talking to Hugo, you need to go for the ones that listen to you, also because your audience is not listening to Radio Comercial, okay? And when we are building a community, and we are starting to build a community, it can grow and can go outside of it. But when you are building your own community, you should focus on the ones on the ones that are listening to what you're doing, and also in terms of media, to the ones that, because they are broadcasting diversity, would have an audience that can be interested in what you have to promote. What is a playlistable a single in Portugal? Normally one that has someone singing, so it has lyrics. It's a lot more difficult for bands that don't have lyrics, or that are only instrumental, to have singles. They should be around 2 minutes, 3 minutes duration max. And from time to time, what we decide to do is to do radio edits for singles that have that characteristic that can be a single, okay? So it's catchy, and so we have it cut, and that's pretty much it. To the ones that aren't playlistable, you need to select the sort of, you need to listen to the radios, because the majority of them, Antena 3, even Antena 1, etc., have author programs where you should attack to have the album or the single spoken about. Sometimes it's easier for you to speak with Nuno Calado or Henrique Amaro or even António Freitas in Antena 3 for them to be putting the music out than to speak with the ones that are deciding the playlist, okay? And also, when you are doing this planification of timings, it's important for you to try to enlarge the period of communication, if you can, if you have the means to, okay? And not concentrate everything in 2 weeks or 1 month. One band from Faf, I don't know if you heard of them, they're called El Señor. I actually know one of the guys from the band, and I'm telling them, you're burning all your resources in 2 weeks. They released a single in 1 week. The week after, and the beginning of the week, they were releasing a second single, and then at the end of that week, they were releasing an album. They did so many investment on producing the content, and then they were just releasing, they were throwing the money away throughout the window. You need to actually create a bigger exposure for it, and to think about that for how long do you want the communication to run? And that's why I also include concerts on it. Because until an album or a band starts playing them, of course there are always albums that do small circulation, but until an album is played on stage and a band starts giving concerts and creating that new leverage of communication that also is the one that connects them to the audience, the thing isn't closed, okay? Until it's like you're giving the testimony to, now that you are starting the concerts, my PR work is done and it's now up to you to keep this motor running for the album and from what's happening on the concert. So it's important also to plan in between the release day and the start of the first concert, and to think what you could do, not only as a PR, but also for your other platforms and the ones that they are creating content to think about content to be released and to update the information and to keep the things being spoken about and having presence all around. Also, I've selected here some tools that I find come in handy, especially if you have a lot of things to do and you have a lot of things to think about. I use marketing tools not only because they allow me to put a lot of emails inside and not to have 2,000 emails written by hand to send out. There's just a couple of examples. You can create free accounts on those up until 2,000 contacts in some, 500 in others. And they're very helpful for you to create newsletters and to create newsletters also for media and to keep your communication running and scheduled for specific days. I give a lot of importance to promo text, and I usually I'm not extremely good on doing those. So normally what I agree with the bands and with the labels we select, also connecting to that idea we were speaking about, or having other people involved, or having other opinion makers joining the group and enhancing the storytelling. I give a lot of importance to the promo texts, also because it's more, they had more than saying the album is out now. They already tell the story about the music. They also kind of force the people to go and listen track to track, to think about each theme, and they also create like ideas, release ideas about what is being done musically in the album. That it's very important to have the journalists interested or motivated to at least listen to the album. Then you have, I forgot to say one very important thing about, so I'm moving back, I'm sorry. It's this part, the pre-launch buzz. Just to say that, of course, when I'm working with a PR, I have a release date, but I start ending out sending the materials regarding the album, especially the music and the digital copies. I like to work with 1 month. Sometimes they don't give me 1 month, but ideally at least 1 month before the release date, so that they have, first of all, so that you have time to do the follow-ups, because you will always have to do follow-ups, okay? You will always have to find a way to send another email, to reach out through phone, to call them, to text them, to make sure that at least they listen to the album and they give you an answer. Sometimes when it's being very difficult, I'm actually my pressure is very focused. I say, at least give me a no, because I'm contracted by a certain band to have a result, and until you say me a no, I'll keep phoning you or texting you. But you need to find, now that I have a relationship with them, I do this, yeah? But you need to find this balance. It's not easy, but you need to find this balance where you are cool and creating a relationship with a person, but you are still putting pressure. Have you listened to the album? Have you listened to this music we've done? Have you heard about this? So you need to keep insisting when you're doing PR to make sure that this that you reach results. That for me, the first one is for people to listen to the music and to be interested on them. Sometimes, especially, I see here that a lot of you are, or at least some of you are working with labels. Sometimes you gain this in between records. In ones it's more difficult, then you have one that impacts more, and then for the next one is easier. So, and that's why it's also very important when you are communicating a label, there's also in the PRs branded material about the label and the connection to the label that is releasing. It should also be used, and it should also be there, not only the information about the project or the music or the bands. And from time to time, it may also be interesting for you, if you find, or if you had an event that was very successful, to remind people that that label did that, or released those, or did that, organize that concert, also to create that, to integrate that on the PR and on the storytelling of the album. Then, of course, all the audiovisual material we need, the long version videos that are the video clips, all the promo shots, and all the small social media content. Now we also develop specific material that we hand out for journalists in case they want to use them. Not all of them use them, but if you are doing for your own social network, I think you should also give them to them, because they have also social media to run. And even though it's still very not exploited in the Portuguese market, where people are sharing a lot of our content, it's always good to send them those as an option. And of course, to create your press kits that would contain all the relevant material and assets for the promotion of the album. That is the text, the image, photos, and covers of the album, or of the singles, a couple of musics also, and the links to the music so they can download, and they can put, especially for radios, this is very important. Relevant media codes, if you have them, use them, prepare them, and put them in your press kits. The social media content is also important, or for instance, like when I was telling you, if you find a band, it's very important for people to have access to the lyrics of the songs. You should also create a document that would put it there, because it helps the journalists have all the material and all the everything ready for the things that they are going to do. Before I go to this case studies, and because I haven't spoken about here about press conferences, and so I will speak a little bit about how I plan the PR for events, so I can speak a bit about press conferences and the relevance of press conferences. Normally, when you're planning an event, you are looking into a schedule PR-wise. It can go from 1 year. I never work in 1 or 2 years, but normally 1 year, if we are talking about the second editions, yeah. So 1 year would be, for instance, with Tremor. At the end of Tremor, we immediately release a press release and a communication saying when the next dates are, because we've reached that state where people actually publish that. It's also a construction. It hasn't happened from the beginning. That doesn't mean that you need to stop doing things. Then we start the communication, let's say around 6 months before the event with the release, and we plan until the day of the press conference, where we decide, that happens 1 month approximately before the event. We decide a number of communications where we will be releasing the artist confirmed, artistical residencies, and we do around 3 to 4 communications. How have we organized them in the last couple of years? Until the end of the year, normally what we do is we focus on releasing mainly music acts and the concerts. not only because it's what impacts the most in PR in media, but also it's because it's a decisive factor, because furthermore a lot of our audience needs to travel to Açores, so it's a decisive factor on people deciding that they want to book a travel and that they want to come and they have time to plan it ahead. And then on the start of January, so we're talking about a communication around October, then a second one close to Christmas time, also because of to take advantage of the fact that people give presents to each other and to sell tickets. Then one in January, because you have that situation where the year changes, so we need to remind you, okay, Tremor, it's happening this year, where we focus on our artistic residencies or other formats of programming we have. We decided to do this, and we felt the need to do and to separate this in communication-wise, because we felt we wanted to explore, not only in media, but also in our social media, the stories around those creative residencies, because we feel that this special creation is what is adding more to the story of what is the festival and what is the different elements of the festival. The work that we've been developing, I don't know if you know the event, but we've been developing for a couple of years of work with the local Deaf Association, where they are now a band that performs concerts, and they have actually recently, through an invitation of a partner we have, went out of Tremor and played in Rock in Rio. And we also have a lot of creative residencies with people that are musicians that are from outside of Tremor, of the Azores, with local musicians, in order, I don't want to use expression help, because I feel it's in order to give access to musicians that are living in an isolated situation to an opportunity of working with people that come from other markets, and that allow them to develop different tools, and to not only in the creation process, but also in what they wanted to do with their own careers, with their own releases. And so we decided to create this movement, this special communication around this, and we've used in different years different strategies. I remember one time I found it was important to give this as an exclusive announcement to a specific newspaper, because I felt it was important to enhance this storytelling. And then we do the press conference, that it's mainly for local media, but that doesn't mean you can't be published outside of your local media. Even in cinema festivals, we do always press conferences, and what you do when you're realizing you will only have local media is that you normally work with, I don't know the expression in English, I'm sorry. It's a forbidden of publication. In Portuguese, we would call it embargo. So I have the PR and all the material ready at least 1 week ahead of the press conference, and I contact specific journalists with that information, guaranteeing that they have enough time. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, at least to produce the news, so that on the day of the press conference, even though they are not there, they release the news and everything, and it kind of appears that people were there and were covering the press conference. This goes with music for radio. I send also a couple of music from bands if they need to add sound to the piece. For TV stations, I add some audiovisual content that may be the spot of the festival, or any sort of content related with films or with music that goes also together with this information, so that they have all the material ready to be published. Normally, this is how I handle the press conferences, always having in mind that one of the major means that you have to close when you're doing a press conference is Lusa. Lusa has people writing everywhere in Porto, is the news agency, the Portuguese news agency. And what it allows you to do is that when they write news about the press conference, and even with albums I do that, yeah, is that they release the take. A lot of them take that news and publish directly. And even when they don't publish, it's another communication that they are receiving on their own email, because a lot of the Portuguese media subcontract Lusa, no? And it's another communication apart from the ones you are doing that they received on their own email. So I brought 2 case studies to talk a little bit about what was the strategy we do. The first one is Glock and Wise. I've been working with their latest album, Gothic Portuguese. And the context for it was this is the 5th album of the band. The band has been circulating in between labels. They are from Barcelos, even though they now pretty much all of them live in Porto. And they started with Lovers and Lollipops, a smaller label where they released their first 3 albums. Their previous album, Plastic, was released through Valentim de Carvalho. But in between the release of that album and this album, they kind of went different parts, okay? So they decided at that point, they had a decision to make whether they would go back to Lovers and Lollipops or whether they would kind of release the album just by themselves. And they decided to do it by themselves. And one of the things we were feeling as a team is that because the previous album, Plastic, had such an impact in everyone, it was also because this album was very special to the band because they kind of shifted into a more mature state part of their, a more mature and adult part of their life as a band. They started singing in Portuguese and writing in Portuguese. So it was like a brand new start, let's call it like that, even though it has a continuation from the work they're doing. And it was so well received in media and by the audience that they were feeling like this was this difficult second album, like that mental thing that they had. So the challenge we had was to maintain that sort of coverage, to enhance what we could, knowing that we had a different album, longer songs, less immediate songs, moving a little bit more onto instrumental, with bigger and longer instrumental parts. And so, as a team, what the strategy to create all this was to not only release a new album, but to release a new label. That kind of was used as a statement for a band, saying that this band has been in an independent label, has done what can be called a major, and now they are formally saying that they go wherever they want by themselves with their own label and following that path by themselves. And also, of course, it has to do with the artistical work by itself, but this was the approach I did, and also what came out of the media, because the discourse was very tight, is that, as I was telling you, they were from Barcelos, and Barcelos and the culture of those who live outside of the big cities of Portugal have certain parts of identity parts that are kind of part of what they do and what they have. We see now when we look at certain artists and a certain revivalism of popular music, as in the sense of traditional music, that we had a couple of years ago a boom, but now we see a lot of artists that are kind of going back to a certain origin or a certain time of music. These bands or these projects were born in that context, okay? Barcelos, is the world of, it's about folklore, it's about popular music. But it's not only about that, it's about a specific way of doing things and about a specific identity of doing things and going outside what it's giving on your own territory, that they incorporated in the music. They incorporated also in what was the visual work of the band, and so we worked around this, saying, this is a band from Barcelos, as you know, but not only they are now living in Porto, but as they are living in Porto and have been living for quite a while, they still have like a feet in there and a feet outside of there. So they kind of look into their own heritage with a different look than the ones of those who stayed in their own city. And so we worked the storytelling around that and on the materials around that. I haven't brought, maybe I should have, but we can, as I have a connection online, some of the articles and some of the things that were released, I haven't brought them because they're written in Portuguese, and so probably they wouldn't be very relevant. These are the visual assets that were created that kind of, the first ones are to visualize, as we can listen also to the music so that we can understand. If I do this, what happens?
Can we reproduce that song? There is some.
Yeah, it should be. I think I'm listening to this, or not. Actually one of the images of the artwork, so it's a very simple video. The budget was not big, so we decided to work with the designer to create a visualizer with the image. Until the end, just for you to get an idea of this sort of, this is the Galo de Barcelos, for those who know. I'm speaking, I'm screaming. The visual assets I brought because I think it kind of explains the ambience of the album that I was explaining you about. This is a cover of the album. They were taken in Museu de Lamas. That is like a museum that was created out of a collector that reunited a lot of artifacts, and where you find all sorts of bizarre things all connected inside. And it has this feeling that it kind of takes you immediately outside of big cities. It takes you to a certain type of Portugal that they wanted to explore on the album and on the lyrics. And this is the only actual real music video that was released from Imagem. I was trying to maybe if I look like this, we can. Yeah.
Que dia frio entrou, nós fora, sem mesma hora, diria que estou a inventar a vida na margem, com tendência para deslumbrar. E esta é o sítio certo. Toda a gente se respeita. Cada com a sua sorte. Ninguém fica descoberto. Ninguém fica descoberto. E aqui ninguém se espanta. Se qualquer gente canta, cantar, cantar, sempre andar. Lançar, lançar isco à água, espelhar,
Portuguese culture. You'll
picar.
see a lot of references to what is very especially the area of me, you see a lot of references. Even though the approach, it's not really obvious because of course we don't step on top of corn, but we do have a time where we collect corn and that we select corn. So the idea, when I brought this example because I find it's very useful when I was telling you about creating a PR strategy that kind of comes from the artistical work of what they were doing, because this is pop music, right, where you're listening to. So what it adds to this, what they had to it, is the storytelling about what they are singing, about the references they bring, and all the communication around the album was done so that everything would focus on that.
Actually, we had two
No, no.
master classes and a round table yesterday with
With
Nono,
none.
discussing copyright issues. It's very nice to see it like this also.
And also, if you saw, it's a shame I cannot bring, because even the interviews and Nuno and Rafa that gave all the interviews, the artistical message was so clear on their minds that even all the interviews just follow this lead, because it's the lead what they were trying to state and say. Regarding to, and getting back to, I can then share, if you want I can share afterwards the presentation for people who want to. This is all online, so. The strategy followed was we released 3 singles, yeah, prior to the launch of the album, the ones we saw before with only visualizers, okay? The first one, we did the radio edit because the music was too long, even though we were pretty sure that the second one was going to be the one that radio liked, and it was like that. But the band felt it was important also to enhance the sort of cuts with people, what people were expecting about Plástico, because Plástico is more made of songs like the second one we listened, more immediate songs, so they felt it was important to create the barrier. And then we released a third single with the video after the album was released, because the first, at least the first, not the first concerts, but the bigger, more important concerts were like 1 month after the launch of the release of the album in Lisbon, in Portuguese. It was a big room. It was a big pressure for the team to fill in also that room. And so the third single was released there, and the strategy we used was to, because it had the video, to give it we gave it as an exclusive to Rimas e Batidas. Also because pretty much the album was featured previously on every media before, so when we were deciding, we said we haven't been featured in Rimas. It's a different audience, it's more hip-hop and electronic music, but let's try and see whether they can be motivated with this music and whether we can reach a different audience. On the day of the release of the album, we released another radio edit that I sent specifically to playlists of one other song of the album, because we knew we felt that this music would be one they would want to pass on the radio, and it's always advisable for you to be the one to cut them. Okay, so if you feel like the music can work for playlists, even after the album is released, you should do a radio edit. And then, yes, this part I already. The press kit, apart from what I've spoken about previously, for this case specifically, had all the lyrics of the album, and I had also a context text that was actually, I believe, written by Nuno itself, where he would explain the mood and the artistical context of the album. Also because in between songs they decided to add some quotes of an interview of a very famous ceramist from Barcelos called Júlia Cota, of an interview she gave to RTP. That was very interesting because the journalist, that was clear enough, from Barcelos, was interviewing her. I don't know specifically the context, but he was interviewing her after she had been to Lisbon to present her work. I don't know if you know the work of Júlia Cota. If you don't know, I advise you to search for it, because even though ceramics is traditional related and to traditional things and traditional figures, there's a lot of artists in Portugal, and specifically in Barcelos, that have this pagan inspiration, that work around devils and very kind of surrealistic ceramics. And we are talking about a woman that was, she did the primary school, was probably she hasn't finished, okay? And she did this incredible work around it, and the journalist was speaking to her like she was coming from the middle of the mountains, as some of them do. So from time to time, when they are speaking from people that don't live in big cities, and they were trying to export that thing of, because you are very traditional, because of course you come to Lisbon, but you want to go back to Barcelos and live in Barcelos because you are connected to the land and to the traditions. And she's very clearly saying, no, I lived in Barcelos, but if I had the chance, I would live in Lisbon tomorrow. She was being so, and it's not very common, it's very interesting, because she was being so challenging to them, and they decided to use some quotes of that in between the album, and in between the songs on the album, also adding that extra line of connection to the general discourse we were developing around the album. And then this is the rest, all the photos, just for you to have a feel of it. The cover of the album is the one in the middle, and the rest is photos and the designs. And the second one, it's about a band I've worked with Omnicord. We've released it. It's a band that exists within the Coimbra Cerebral Palsy Association. It's made by people that have cerebral palsy, so they have limitations when it comes to movement and communication, at least as we know it. The band had existed for 30 years, but had never released an album. And when Omnicord found this project, and also because Omnicord is working a lot around this idea of social inclusion as a big spectrum, they decided to release this album. And we wanted to position this for the music and not, even though of course there's a story to be told apart from that, but we wanted to position and to create content and to position the music more central in the fact that they were musicians, because they have been rehearsing and creating music for 30 years, but also to promote it, because normally what happens, I think I need to give more context to this, is that normally these sort of projects are presented within the context of their existence, okay? So it's either they're performed within the other cerebral palsy associations, but you would rarely see them in traditional music venues, in traditional festivals. And the work we were trying to develop, the booking parts, and the communication, was to try to get outside of that and to position them in other spaces and in other festivals, and to speak about the members. So what we do with this, for this one I have less materials, is as we only released a single with the video, but we did a documentary also. And on the PR text that I haven't brought, we were introducing each element of the band with names, explaining how they became musicians, what they wanted to do. And even the Somos Punks On Now kind of goes through the process of the recording of the album, introduces each member, and this was made also on the rehearsal of they had collaborations when producing albums. They have Vitor Torpedo, they have Surma, they have Cabrita, they have Rui also from First Breath After Coma. They had a couple of collaborations. Curious enough about this. Coisa que senão também posso ver direito. Pois. Tela animada. A ver se vai lá.
Vai que
released the album, after that they were playing like several theaters. They even actually played here in AVEIRO, in the theater. And we can, this is a Portuguese, I'm not sure if they have English subtitles actually. And this kind of introduces the process that explains. Then the documentary, when we were doing that tour, was also being screened before the show to give context and introduce the musicians that were playing on the theaters. And then we managed to make it circulate to, we tried cinema festivals, but we weren't able to do that. But we were able to put it in a TV where it was broadcast. Curious enough, we got reports for the launch of the album, where I think they became really famous like a week ago, because they played with Coldplay in the last play of the concert of Coldplay. Out of the sudden, it wasn't a strategy. It was actually, but it's also now stepping out of what we are speaking about, because it was actually their idea to release a post on their Facebook page saying, Coldplay, we want to meet you. And so to follow the process, and even when you speak with George is this one that is now here. He has now the attitude and the confidence of a musician and of a music star. I wasn't there after the concert of Coldplay, but I was speaking with he was telling me, George was saying, okay, this one is done, next one, he just performed for 50,000 people. But it's interesting that the work that has been done with them is also creating confidence on that part. They feel like musicians. The next part of what Omnicord will do is they're closing the international tour. They did the national tour, now they're doing an international tour, and I believe that will be recorded also, and it will be released as a documentary. Now, not focusing on the band itself, but we are having a team reporting and giving feedback to the houses about the problems of when it comes to accessibility within the stages, because it's difficult for them to go to. For some of them, it's very easy to go up on stage. But for instance, for Fausto, the lead singer, they need to have certain equipment. So they're doing this text documentary. We'll add to the story that part. Okay, so giving back to the promoters. This is our feedback. This is the difficulties we found throughout Europe and throughout. How can we overcome and how can we enhance the story about this. This is the strategy that is being followed with Quinta Poncada, that we hope, and we have now a second project also from APCC that we're working with, that is a sample orchestra, but we are hoping that this sort of projects kind of open also the space to other projects with different people from what people state as normal, that do different sorts of singing, different sorts of approaches to music, if what can follow and what comes out of that. And I would finish my presentation here and open this to a discussion panel about any questions you may have and may want to address me. If you have. If you have. Any if you want to share ideas on your own projects, any difficulty you have, we can speak a little bit about that. Or not.
So, yeah, we were talking before, I think it's really valuable information also about timings, and we all know a bit the limitations of our national context right now. There is not enough qualified people writing about music and professional outlets, so it's really difficult to get this little span of attention these people have for so many, well, happily so many nice stuff that is coming out all the time. But yeah, just some maybe more practical also questions like, for example, how do you organize your press list? Like, what are, like, because also if you are working with different genres and, you know, and different kinds of event or of album, or how do you usually organize this journalist?
I have a big database that I create that is organized by journalists within specific media, general contacts, agendas also, and I organize them first of all by when they are published, also to organize my timings because I know if Ibsen's closes on Tuesday. But what I normally do, from all of that, every year you do a selection of people that are writing regularly about music. And because I'm now, apart from specific projects like Lock and Wise, I mainly work with Omnicord and Lovers and Lollipops. So I run a database that it's open that has everybody on it. When I'm working with MailChimp, on the releases, everybody is in there. Because even though I know that, for instance, Pedro Rios is not writing about a band, for me it's important that is impacted or it receives the music, okay? Certain people, I know it's very important. And then what I do is I create a specific plan for each album saying, these are the objectives. And I create and I select the journalists specifically on each mean that I'm going to, for those, a smaller list. It's a personal email. It's the following up contacts. This is how I shorten the list. But for the big releases of the PRs and the singles, everybody, even caras, even general contents in caras. Because it's important for me, and from time to time we have some interesting solicitations even from those media. I've received emails from Nova Gente sometimes. That album's releasing. Do you have the cover? Of course I have the cover. But for me to say something that I'm working every day to achieve and a short list, it's not. My audience for the albums I'm working with, it's not there. From time to time, it's important for me to do that sort of communication. For albums, I do a short list. For festivals, it's a little bit different. Because normally the plans are bigger, and for those I contact directly Caras and Nova Gente with that. And normally what I do, even though they are on my big lists, I take a couple of, I don't know, one day to organize the list and say, for Caras, what is the pitch I'm going to do? I'm going to grab on this part of the festival. I'm going to pick up on these artists. And I organize a specific email to that person that I know now, Ana Palomi, that sometimes writes about culture, and say, Tremor is coming, it's happening these dates, we have this and this bands, and we have doing now in terms of creation this and that, and I organize a specific content for that. In previous years, and I've managed to do more. I remember one year we had this artist, Maria Boralvo, but I also run those searches. Sometimes an international artist, when I want to do something in Vogue, I pick on the list of artists and I go for Vogue International to see if any of them write a feature about one of the artists that is coming to my festival. And I start my pitch with that to Vogue. Vogue Brazil wrote a big piece about this artist, and she has these great photos because image is very important for them. So I do both things. I organize the general communications, but then I create each pitch according to what I feel. For certain journalists, is what I feel is listening. For certain media, it's what I feel they would publish. Okay, I would love for them to publish sometimes bigger stories about my events or my bands, but if they don't have the space, I pick up specific things. I don't know if I've answered your question.
I have more questions. I can continue.
First.
Well, this, as far as you remember, what was the best title you wrote for a press release?
I don't remember.
No?
No,
What
I
one
don't.
that you remember that impact that you think caused the impact, or at least?
I don't think the titles actually did a lot of difference in what I do. Do a lot of difference in what I do. Actually, no. When you have a big name, just by issuing it with a name on top of it, I think it impacts. Apart from that, I don't think for any of the bands, I never felt that what I wrote on the subject would matter. Really.
Maybe because you already have a relationship with a few journalists that already kind of at least open what's usually what you send them, no? Like,
Yeah, also because of that, and also because you always need to, even I need to do a follow-up on that, okay? And when you realize that, you would more, for instance, for a long time, I would say hello on the subject, that I would do as a strategy, for them to know that this was not a mail out. I would write hola and the name of the person on the subject, and from there I started to realize that I was receiving more answers because people started to realize it wasn't a mail out. And then on the text it's already the adapted message, but I never felt, but probably I'm not brilliant with that, because maybe other people are brilliant and got clicks from the title. Tá bom.
come on, people.
PR is always difficult for people to ask questions. It's normal.
Well, next.
I haven't spoken about media partnerships. I can run a quick
well,
one
that should
about
be-
one, yeah, because I haven't spoken about them. Also because for a long time we still have a couple of, for instance, Antena 2 still supports the release of albums, but it's more now difficult to find people two albums that do media partnerships with albums. But for events, it's very common, and for concerts, we use it a lot. I haven't mentioned, for instance, for Glock and Wise, but they were Antena 2 was a partner for our concerts launch. I work a lot with media partnerships for events. And normally, the approach I make, because I only work with ones that don't require investment, okay? At first, I would negotiate with them access to content first-hand, especially online. Some exclusive content that they may have that first-hand. And that would be normally what I would approach new media partners to do. At this point, what are the media partnerships that can be developed in the Portuguese market? Nationally, without paying Antena 1, Antena 2 e Antena 3, that are very accessible to a lot of things, depending on the time they have. I would advise you at this point to at least contact people with 3 months prior to any sort of thing you want to do, because there's a lot of solicitations, okay? But before you do that, you need to make sure. Again, it's like when you're writing to journalists that you try to think, if I was an editor in there, what would I publish, okay? So when you are approaching for the first time, select from the list, if you're working with an event, the events you know they like, the artists you know they like, or the people you know they know, okay? Tell in short what is I always tell on the first paragraph what I feel is different with my events or with what I'm promoting. And this is different because It's a small thing happening in a village, and I've never seen a production team that has involved everybody in the village and that opens. It's different because they've been working for the last 3 months is understanding how the circulation of people, for instance, with Nascença project I'm working with in Leiria. This is the second edition. On the first edition, we didn't got the support of Antena 3, and now we managed to do. Sometimes you need to insist, okay? And also you need to prove. You need to show what we are going to do. And I also understand. Also because the lineup is not very connected to the sort of artists they are now, they were putting at the moment, even though a couple of them are now like big playlist hits with them. And we were working a lot with the idea of nature and the community being very involved, participating and creating. The restaurant is creating by them. They are the DJs. They are helping with everything and they're very enthusiastic. And we had to do that, do the after movie and do also that communication to show that, to approach this year Antena 3 and say, so let's speak again about Nascença. We are doing this work in the village called Fontes, that it's involving all the community from top to bottom. They are helping producing the event. We are opening this year an exhibit that was constructed with their own photos and the materials they gave to us so that we created. And because they have seen the past and they tend to search for stories that are different, okay? Because to see a very good concert in the stage, you see everywhere. To have different stories that they can work and develop for themselves, you need to show them that you have them. And they can go there and create different reports, and not only, because otherwise it's going to be difficult for us, because we don't have the same gunpowder as Calorama, as we have great artists. That's not what I'm saying. But it's, we don't have the same, when it comes to being a festival, you don't have the same gunpowder as Calorama, as Eminent, as the bigger ones. So you need to show them that ours has different stories, has different approaches, and that their reports will also allow them to have different experience and explore different things. And not only they are being our media partner for the first time, they are sending a person, Marta Rocha, to cover the events. And she's actually arriving one day before because she wants to be with the village helping the preparation of the event. So she understood completely what we were talking about. And that's the sort of approach. When you want to create a media partnership at this point with so many things happened, not only the timing, but the focus on what you're trying to achieve, what is different about your message, if you're trying to create a community, if you're trying to launch a new debate, that's the critical part. Also, the difference about media partnerships, just to make it clear, is that when we're dealing with a media partnership, we negotiate exposure, that it's ads, okay? It's like audio for radio. When you have a media we're not talking about only editorial, and sometimes we're not even talking about editorial. We're talking about an exchange that involves where it's more in the area of ads and publicity, and not so much editorial, even though sometimes it connects to editorial. But we are talking about banners in home pages, we are talking about social media shares. We discuss that sort of things when we are developing media partnerships, and that's what I call a media partner. For someone to write an article about an event, it's not a media partner. It's a normal coverage.
Also, besides what they can offer you, which is usually advertising, sometimes going editorial also, you also can offer something on your side. What are usual, like, and I think the most interesting is trying to find new formats of things you can offer to these media outlets, also to get them involved in a way that is not just a basic, but that you are also not just put their logo on your communication or what's not, but like what else have you seen?
Well, for instance, what we do a very interesting thing with RTP Açores. Also, we produce a daily content about the festival. That is a program we produce ourselves, and we negotiated that with a partnership. Also, because we didn't want it to be hosts to the sort of content they create. We wanted to, apart from what is the spot, what is the promo of the event, if you have the capacity to do that, to create your own content and say, oh, I'm creating this sort of content that has this format, and I think it should be, it's good, it's going to be cool for you to share. We did also an interesting, but it was actually their own idea from Gerador. This year with Tremor, they created a geocaching within Tremor. So it was more like a parallel activation, and they were communicating about the festival. They were also adding programming. We've discussed in other events, for instance, an event that has also this part of having people from, especially people from outside and from the market speaking about this, but having them creating like texts and give them the publication to the media partners. Mill does that with a couple of the speakers they receive. Also because they issue a magazine, and some of the articles are offered as content to media in order for them to publish. Ideas can go outside of that. If you have, I remember with Antena 3, also because they were very motivated, they loved Milhões de Festa, they would actually create, we had our own TV spot, but they would create a promo video. Specifically, we would help them with production on the scene, but it can also be an idea that you can discuss with them to create a specific promo video. That would be some, the sky is the limit. It depends also on what I feel is important is for you to not rely, sometimes when you have like big and strong relationships that have developed throughout time, they will come with more ideas and they will produce more contents. When you're starting, present them ideas that are key in hand, a solution that they can implement. If you can produce video interviews and you are producing interviews, why not discuss with them? RTP Palco also, we were discussing with them for another festival, the live streaming for RTP Palco of a certain conversations we were having. Because we were going to live stream to Facebook, so the material was there. It's just another channel you have to connect. It's that sort of content that you may, if you have the team for it, you can use that to promote. Or takeovers. I've seen artists taking over. If there's an artist they love, artists taking over social media. I've seen that happening. Things like that can be done also.
Thank you. Shall I use the microphone? As a participant in this festival, I'm here in kind of in the gray area because I have a small label which edits jazz and contemporary music, which is already a very small niche. So we're kind of condemned not to have that much media success. But anyways, that's not what we're looking for. But we are looking for our audience, and I think that's something we need to work out. From all the things that you've mentioned, I don't think that there's anything we didn't do. So I think it's also a matter of, looking for different partnerships. Mm-hmm. Because since it's such a small, circle, and in Portugal to start with, in the world also, but in Portugal to start with, I feel like we've already we've already reached our public, to be quite honest. But it just doesn't seem to resonate to a point where we can sustain ourselves independently, like autonomously. And
The question you have to ask yourself is, where are you creating your new audiences?
mhm.
What sort of content, without, of course, I'm not a defender, where marketing should impose to the artistical creation, yeah? I'm not a defender of that, and I'm not defending that. But when it comes to your marketing strategy,
Mm-hmm.
are you speaking the language new generations are speaking? Are you creating the sort of materials that are reaching to that sort of generation? And it has more to, I think, after a certain point, it has to do more with that. Even though with jazz, what I feel is sometimes it's difficult. I've worked with Porta Jazz for a brief moment, and I think at a certain point they also don't want to open that much of what they are doing. They kind of are closed inside of themselves. But you can always construct an audience in what you do, as long as you present it in a format where people, or in a context where people want to see it also. I tell you, for instance, we had Angel Bagdawi, that you may know, a jazz artist in Tremor, doing a creation with a philharmonic band. And it was one of the favorites of the audience. Probably they didn't know Angel's work. But it was presented in a certain context. First of all, it's I'm not saying that's the solution, but maybe if you're closing the genre also to a specific thing, you're not creating new audiences. We face the same problem with I work with this event in Porto that it's called Amplifest. That's specifically about heavier genres, dark music, because it's not only about metal and the derivations of metal, it has other things. But it has been a work for me as a PR to explain to them that the festival, it's not only about heavy metal. And the strategy that because of a specific thing, it has a lot of that, but it has other things, and it has other cross things. So you need to what I'm saying with that is that when you are closing also your audience and giving them certain labels, at least in the Portuguese marketing, you are doing your own niche, and sometimes it's very difficult for you to get outside of that.
I was thinking that one thing that stood out for me, there were two things that stood out for me from what you've mentioned. One of them is the storytelling aspect of it. It seems like the most relevant thing that we haven't yet grabbed like in its full extent. And I think that the storytelling, it connects to me personally, so why shouldn't it connect to the audience that we're aiming for? So I say we have a lot of work to do there, which seems to be like a very important part of grabbing a new audience, for instance. And the other was also the fact that from all the success cases that you've mentioned, I feel like the community aspect of it is like part of it as well. So to involve the community, and I don't feel that we've tried it enough. I mean, as a label, it's kind of hard to include the community if you don't have like a festival, for instance. We only had one edition of the festival, but other than that, how would you include the community where you're
you need to work with it, but the presentations and the live, I've mentioned also for bands and for projects and labels, of course we always aim to sell records, and we do that also because we want to sell records. But I feel, for instance, with both Omnicord and Lovers and Lollipops, it's very important for us to have live moments, to have concerts. And even though some of them are not festivals, Lovers has done concerts in small places in Porto, in small places but since day one they have done concerts everywhere. And what they started to do is work within the city, in Lady also, of course. they started to work with the own community that was living in the city, okay?
Yeah.
And we are now, for instance, with Lovers, we have a space, where we organize, it's our own space, it's the office, but it's our own space. And we're installed in a neighborhood that also is where some of the artists we are releasing work, live, have their studios.
Yeah.
Where some of the designers we work with have their studios.
Yeah.
So it pretty much is an ecosystem that balances itself, creates creates a community because it's a community, and then the story grows because it's something that comes from that, it has that identity, comes from that community. And it's also for you, it creates a bottom line for you to invest in other things, because now we know how many people we move and what we can do. So to start creating a bit more money, we open from there, okay? Because we do like, even in the area of Bonfim, through Lovers and Lollipops and a good friend of ours that organizes fairs, we started a little fair, edition fair, and in the time of Christmas, where we use our space and we talked to all the people that lived in there, saying, let's start opening our houses close to Christmas. You show your work. Let's do a fair around here. Maybe we do a little programming. There's a lot of DJs and bands here. We can organize something around this. And that is attracting people from outside it's called perimeter, this event. It started attracting people from other parts of that were outside of the community that we were based on. And now we're trying to escalate to a bigger event, okay? Also because we needed at certain point in terms of financial sustainability, to organize a bigger event, trying to grasp other venues like Coliseu, Aos Hábitos, like the big venues that are in Porto, okay? With an event that it's ours, that is going to have our own program. So we would have our mindset, and that connects to the label, because that connects to the sort of feeling of what you are producing. So it could be and with Tremor also, we started working with the community from day one, even the PR as local partners, even though that at the start of every project, I know that they don't know any of the artists we program. But we have a discussion around having interviews there with all of the artists. I send them a selection of the songs, and we built this relationship where they would pass songs that they don't normally broadcast just during the week of Tremor, talking about the festival, to create and to approach to the community of Azores. And that has changed a lot. I've not been working with the festival since day one, but I've been working for the last 5 editions, and you see now a new generation of people. It's not only, of course, about Tremor, it's about all the events and all the community artists that in between was created in Azores, and you see now a community of people organizing events and that bring other people, and they are doing other things, and they have galleries.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly the point we've been missing out as a label, is that we haven't figured out how to correctly interact with the community. I think that's
You're based where? Coimbra, right?
But well, we're 2, and I live in Lisboa, and my partner lives in Coimbra, so it makes it a little bit harder. And also, I think the mentality I'm an artist myself, and I have trouble asking artist colleagues to come and play for free, and travel. And like you were mentioning, you have to have a budget for that. We don't own a budget, so we can call our own artists and say, come on and do a showcase for us in the city where the label is funded. So it's just shift of mentality that I feel like we need to help construct so that we can promote our artists also better. But it has to be with everyone
it's a conversation to also I'm not defending that people should play without being paid, but we need to understand what is the Portuguese context and the market.
Yes.
Even we were speaking about bands here that for a long time went to Lisbon to play, and what they would get were door deals. It's pretty common in Portugal, but it's the way the market results. But as a label, we are working on a plan where after a release of an album, the idea is on the second album to step up. But that plan, and even when it comes to promotion, there's a certain part of things where you do that. Now with certain bands, they ask me, if you want to do, they need to come here and do a live interview. And I say, no, it's either telephone or Skype. My band is not going to Lisbon on purpose to do that. It's a band that has been that you playlist a lot. So if you want to talk to them, they don't need to pick up a car or pick up a bus to go to Lisbon to talk to you. And you are so after a while you create this relationship where things happen in a different way. But what I'm talking about here more the construction of a community within local communities. It has to do with the people getting to know each other and being in exchanging energies. Mm-hmm. And for that, you need to have a live. And you need to construct a model where you can build something that pays out, of course, yeah.
Sorry, can we know the name of the label? It's a great time for self-promotion.
Yeah.
Roda Music Independent label. Yeah, and we just opened a sub-label for electronic music as well. We're just starting out. We have our launching concert. It's a DJ set in Coimbra, so we're trying out. And we're gonna do electronic music, but it goes from electroacoustic music to the electronic music. So we're still in like this very wide spectrum of what electronic music means, and we asked DJs to remix the mother catalog to do some remixes of the music that we added on the mother label, which is Roda. So it's an experiment. It's been very interesting, the result, and we're gonna do all of that on the 22nd of June. So please come, come join us. It's a DJ set. You can just go in and listen to music and have some nice drinks and talk.
More questions? Any questions?
Okay, so my context is a bit different because I do communications at Creatua, which is a music venue. So it's not a festival, I'm not a musician, but we still have difficulties in, because we work a lot with bands that are still a bit small and doesn't have a steady fan base to fill up the room. And it's not even about the financial side of it, because we're all volunteers, and at the end of the year we can't even have profit. So it's just about financial stability and also the joy of bringing this to Aveiro. But what is the role of the venue communication here? Where does it stop? Where is it the band work, the fan base? When do we drop the towel, basically? Like where?
Until the room is full. I don't know. I've worked for a couple of years. It was even though it was in Lisbon, we faced a lot of problems also with music box, with a lot of bands that were playing for 20 people, national and international bands. For me, what I defend, of course, the band also has to promote itself, but it's difficult for a band, for instance, that it's not from a certain territory to at least communicate in the territory. That part, the venue is very important, that the venue can help the bands communicate.
That would be my second question, because what I would say from what I've heard from this class is more like about the specificities of a festival, right? The storytelling about the venue, like what do we bring different that other places don't? But what would you say are the particularities of communicating a concert from a band from Leiria in Aveiro that we should have in mind?
I haven't spoken about venues. I think the approach is actually different. You need to work on the general communication of the venue first, okay? So in here, when I was in Music Box, because I wasn't doing only PR, I would do everything. Since I did everything, I created partnerships with hostels so that they would send tourists to Music Box. I created partnerships with pub crawls because of the clubbing part. I would go myself, and because we didn't have money at a certain point to glue or to put posters in places, I would go myself to specific places I felt they were important to put posters about specific concerts, okay? And so there's the communication also of the venue itself that you need to do. You need to create a line, especially in social media, where together with the designer or a social media content person, where people know it's Creatua, that it's communication, and when people know it's Music Box. And you need to, of course, organize also your own communication in order for you not to post a lot, for you to be able to create specific moments where you have a lot of communication. Normally, what we would organize our plan somewhere like this. We had a rentrée in September, where we would announce with media and a campaign and videos and a specific campaign for the rentrée. Or we would put out some of the names until the end of the year. Some of the big names, of course, in this decision, and even with festivals, you do a decision using names that you know already have a fan base, and in the middle of that go other names that you still need to work on and that they need to be worked. And so we would do this very strong campaign, covering all that, focusing on that. And then we would do a regular monthly communication for media, but then on specific concerts, we would develop strategies. It was either to develop media partnerships for specific concerts, even with online, for instance, with smaller bands, I would go for online. Yeah. Partnerships with them, and we discussed things we could do. It's either on banners or giveaways, the interviews, video IDs. It depends also on what the band allows you to do. If you have someone that can do an interview with them, and maybe you can not only post it in between you and the band, because if the band has a low fan base, maybe it would be good to use that content with a media that would have a wider audience. So you would develop like that. So you have the monthly where you do the agenda one, and then you select specific ones that you have. And then you have to be on the, I don't know, I've done, depending on the concert, I would try everything. I call embassies, associations. I know at a certain point we had a lot of cumbia and that sort of music, South American music. So I discovered pretty much all the associations in Lisbon that were working with people that I know. Maybe from here we can create an audience. Yeah. So I would try everything to try it for each of the venues. But then I only spoke to you about the moments of communication. So we would do one in rentrée, then we do the communication of the new year also, of course, yeah. Then in January, again, a similar situation to the rentrée. This is what's going to happen. And then after that, we would do probably in June, just a last PR saying that now we're closed to concerts, because at that point Music Box will close to concerts, and this is clubbing from now on, and it's happening this. And from there on we would try to focus in what we could in getting the message through to more tourism magazines and other, even international magazines, to promote because we knew at that point that the audience was shifting and it was more about tourism than local people. But it was also very important for us to have our own newsletter and our own database that we work on with regularly, and where you can give them special content, where you could advise them on. From there, you can do whatever you want to keep that audience close to you. You can offer certain discounts, give them access to certain things within an event, that you can create this exclusive access. And but it's also important for you to do that. And also, in close relation with the program, to be aware of people that are movie people within your city. Of course, that you do. It's the basic knowledge of when you are running a house that needs to be open. It's always being, no, that people is doing DJ sets over there, it's moving people, we need to do something like here. And we would discuss also with the artists what we would do. Creating special, even with design materials, with things that, of course, it couldn't be with everything, but with at least two of the bands a week, or with two of the things a week, we would discuss how are we going to promote this when it comes to visual identity. You have your audience, I want to incorporate it without losing, so that part is also important.
So you would advise us to have that conversation with the artists first, because we are making some small clips, video clips for concerts normally, and they're like ideas that we have normally memes. They work as memes, but they're not memes. They're like videos that relate to the band somehow. And of course, this can be tricky with bands that have a very strong visual identity that doesn't want to be interfered. So you would advise us to do that in order to
with certain projects, I feel like it's important for you to have that conversation and to incorporate what they have to do, what they have to say.
Yeah.
Also because in a lot of movements, you see that the visual part has a lot of relevance for the audience that's being created, and so I think it needs to have.
For sure, yeah.
And even for certain groups of people and certain, it's very uncommon for you to do. This is a very simple example to give, for you to see a metal festival communicating a different way than that black cover with that names of the bands that you can already read.
Yeah.
The audience already connects to that sharp. The same with hip hop, and so I think if you have this conversation, it helps you. And also because I'm seeing, I don't do social media content, but I follow, and I see some colleagues of mine that are doing very interesting content with the dialogue they open with the bands, because some of them have very good ideas, and that also allows you to communicate to other groups that probably your own visual identity is not communicating within the city.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
No, I'm cool, thank you.
Done? Now we have a cigarette and we speak informally. That's cool for me. Obrigada, eu.